Greetings to all of you, Sanbonani. That is a Zulu greetings, that means I see you. I see all of you as the creation of God, as you see me today. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you today, and I also like to thank God for this amazing opportunity. These articles will challenge a few assumptions about the church in the Southern Africa on the use of the scripture and the misinterpretation of the sacred texts against LGBTI people. It will also touch on how the church has viewed human rights before we can even begin to talk about decriminalization. I will also touch on the lived experience in my own context, South Africa, of LGBTIQ people. The question that I want to close with will be, what was the role of the church then, and what is the role of the church now? How have things changed or not for LGBTI people on the ground? I would like to begin by reading the scripture from the book of Psalms 24 from the Message Bible. God claims earth and everything in it. God claims world and all who lived in it. That is where I want to start my conversation. This has been my saving verse that always reminded me that I and everyone else in this world have been put in it by God. God created earth and all of us in God's image. And that is the gift that we all have inherited, not earned. But sadly, some of us have tended to think that others are not part of the creation of God because of their sexuality, gender, and sexual orientation. Southern Africa is predominantly Christian. Although there are many other faiths, most of the African countries have declared that they are Christian state more than secular state. That seems to be a challenge for LGBTI people. Some churches have been hateful when it comes to the issues of LGBTIQ. Most of the time, when issues of LGBTI are discussed, sacred texts, especially the Bible, is used as a weapon to attack LGBTI people in Southern Africa. Sermons have been produced that are full of hate and discrimination. That has a bad impact on LGBTI people in the region. I want to continue by saying that the church has made it hard for LGBTIQ person to live, as most churches have so much influence within the state and the government. We see in so many government institutions, LGBTI people struggle to get help. One example that comes to mind, especially here in South Africa, some marriage officers refusing to perform their duties as public servants into solemnizing civil union because of their conscience and their religion. That is a basic human right, but most of the time the rights get to be taken away by others who thinks that they can and this should be okay. This shows how many of the bad influence the church has been. Due to this, LGBTI people must travel a long distance to find home affairs that have marriage officers who are willing to marry them without any judgment. We witness over the years many LGBTI people leaving churches, and many are struggling to integrate their sexuality and their spirituality. Others are brave enough to start their own churches with the hope that they continue with their spiritual journey without anyone judging them. We have seen LGBTIQ churches, especially here in South Africa, as they cater for spiritual needs, and I was also part of the church myself. The other issue is conversion therapy, that we see many, especially in South Africa, and in my own lived experience, LGBTIQ people are forced to go through what is called conversion therapy. It is when the church forcefully prays for a person with the belief that they are possessed by demons and they will change. If that does not help, Many families then force LGBTIQ people into forced marriages with the belief that they will change. That is very harmful to a person because you are asking someone to hate themselves as if they created themselves in the first place. Most LGBTIQ goes through depression and commit suicide, self-hate, and many use substance abuse as they're trying to numb the pain of being rejected and hate God for creating them. All these experiences have a negative psychological, spiritual, social effects such as low self-esteem, trauma, mental health, depression, and limited access to health services, underachieving or dropping out of schools and universities, loneliness, unintegrated sexual and spiritual identity, homelessness, self-hate, and anger and suicide. This also led most LGBTIQ to wrestle with integrating their sexuality and their faith. They self-hate and continue to self-judging. Others will continue living a double life, and that cannot be easy. When a person has been constantly worried or questioning the connection or not connected with God, it makes them to start questioning their own existence and start hating themselves more. There is so much pain, hurt, and rejection that most are carrying and have internalized. The impact of that I have seen in my capacity as a pastor doing counseling have been massive. It is sad to see how much internalized shame and disconnected some LGBTIQ people feels. I know this reality as I lived through the pain and hurt myself in my own journey due to the rejection I received because of my sexual orientation. I want to touch around issues of human rights and church. Human rights have been viewed by some churches not generally having a place in a church, and in some view as unchristian and demonic. What this means for the church and how they have responded needs to be questioned, as you cannot separate the two. The church needs to rethink their stand and revisit what the church role is and why the church exists in the first place. The church needs to be reminded that all human beings, not some, are created in the image of God, and they are equally in the eyes of God. Human rights are also important and are part of the inherent dignity and equality of all human beings. What does the basic foundation of being Christian mean? To love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love is the beginning of it all. Then it will be easy to start talking about the issues of exclusion, justice for all regardless, including all human beings in their different forms, including sexuality, gender, and orientation. I also want to touch about decriminalization of zogi in Africa. South Africa was the first country in Africa to decriminalize homosexuality and include issues of sexuality in the constitution. The protection of LGBTIQ rights in South Africa is based on the Section 9 of the Constitution, which forbids discrimination by sex, gender, or sexual orientation, and applies to government and to private parties, including the church. The Constitution and legislative reforms did not mean that attitude within the communities and the church were changed. That we got to find in 1996. And in 2006, we were the fifth country in the world to do legalize gay marriage, and the first on the African continent. And that was something that was very powerful for LGBTIQ people. The church played a significant role during apartheid regime, fighting and resisting political and theological oppression that was brought by white in 1956. 1948. The church organized itself into making sure that its voice were heard. The only focus, though, during that time was based on the fighting against apartheid that affected everyone. Other issues were not on the table for discussions. An example of this is the Kairos document that was issued in 1986. In all that the church have achieved, reality kicks in now that there were so many groups of people that were left behind, including LGBTIQ. I believe even now, the church can have a role and start to do what the church was called to do, to fight for all injustice, for all and not for some. The voice of the church is not where to be found when LGBTI get killed, when lesbians are being raped, facing stigma and discrimination. One example that I want to talk about is the issue of a young man, Lindo Cele, who was 23 years old, performer from KZN, was attacked by a man in a daylight. There were numerous witnesses allegedly did nothing as Lindo was repeatedly stabbed many times. What was Lindo's crime? Was part of the LGBTI community. How on earth a human being does such a horrific act in another human being and the other human being just stand there and do nothing? Where is the voice of the church when all these deaths are happening? It's mute. I long for more prophets like Bishop Tutu, who despite his reputation, he even today continues to let his voice to be heard in spite of rejection he's receiving from some of the religious leaders. The situation right now is still difficult for LGBTIQ on the ground. Even though the laws are behind them, LGBTI people on the ground face so much violence, stigma and discrimination, exclusion, and many other violations. COVID-19 and lockdown presented with some more struggles in terms of many LGBTIQ losing work, not included in the government strategies for the food parcels, etc., some with no homes to go to, shelters caters only for women and children, but LGBTI people not being included. Healthcare facilities sending them away when needing to go collect their depression medication and hormones for transgender persons. All this had a bad impact on their well-being. In my capacity as a pastor, I have dealt with many cases also of lesbians being raped, but not being able to open any cases as they feared double victimization in the hands of police. I've also witnessed how all this hate and discrimination on the ground cause so much of mental illness within the LGBTI as a sense of loss. Lastly, on the initiatives that have been done, one example is the work of the Global Interfaith Network in the region, who works with the Council of Churches, creating a space for dialogues and trainings of trainers using one body material on issues of faith and sexuality. That is an achievement. This extends not to merely having this conversation in isolation, but including LGBTI people of faith using hard set on pilgrimage material to help prepare LGBTI people of faith as dialogue partners. This has been a great achievement. We are seeing results, even though I believe that we can still do more. The discussions looks at the roles of allies in these conversations. Materials have been developed on the role of the church in the context of violence against LGBTI groups, with the purpose of training church leaders. While process is ongoing and there continue to be challenges, the space for dialogues on religion and LGBTI rights have been opened up, which represents significant strides compared to the previous status quo. Another group that has been doing such amazing work is called Lerato la Basadi, the Love of Women, a Benoni Mothers Union. This is a group of women from different denominations who are advocating for the equal rights of LGBTI and speak to other parents about accepting their kids as they are the gift of God. They talk about there is no dustbin to throw our children away because of their sexuality. God does not create mistakes. Another group that has been doing some work is Sanarela, working with traditional churches, pastors who have LGBTI children coming forward and speaking out against these crimes. We have groups like I Am, Umoja, doing contextual Bible studies, to name the few. I am grateful and I thank the organizers for this opportunity again, and I hope that we'll continue having these conversations, we'll continue to fight, we'll continue to raise our voices as churches so that these injustices cannot continue in our name. Thank you.